Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. You know, something we hear a lot is there anything else out there besides Scrum? Like, are we stuck with this one way of doing things?
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's this kind of growing feeling of, well, is Scrum really working for us, or is it just like a lot of busy work in process?
Right, like, are we just going through the motions?
Mm.
So today we're diving into some alternative approaches to product development. We'll take a look at Basecamp's Shape Up,
Hmm.
and then we'll see how the principles of Kanban and Fit-for-Purpose can actually make Shape Up even better.
Exactly. I think the goal here isn't to pick a winner. It's more about like really understanding the strengths and weaknesses of each approach.
Yeah.
So you can decide what might be the best fit for your team. We're going to be looking at a few articles
Okay.
that explore this kind of evolution of thinking
Yeah.
in the product development world.
Sounds good. Okay, so I think we should start with what everyone's probably pretty familiar with, right? Scrum.
Yeah.
I mean, you've probably been in those daily stand-up meetings, where it's like, what did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? Any blockers? And sometimes it feels like you're just like giving a status update and not really collaborating or problem solving.
Yeah, it can feel very robotic sometimes, right? Like you're just kind of going through the motions.
Exactly. And then there are the sprints,
Right.
which, can be super intense. Like everyone's rushing to try and get everything done by the end of the sprint. And sometimes it can feel like you're sacrificing quality just to meet the deadline.
Definitely. And then there's backlog grooming, which can sometimes feel like a black hole of ideas.
Oh, the backlog. I know. It's like this never-ending list of features
Right.
that you may or may not ever get to.
Yeah, and you're just constantly adding stuff to it, and it's just getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, when are we actually going to build all of this stuff?
Right. And in the first article we dug into, it talked about these common Scrum frustrations. And I thought it was like so spot on. It talked about sprint planning theater. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah.
Where it's like you spend all this time planning out the sprint in detail, but then like things change so quickly.
Right.
And it feels like it was almost like a waste of time.
Like a performance.
Yeah. And then backlog bloat. That's the one we were just talking about.
Yeah,
Wow.
exactly. And this often comes from like a lack of clear prioritization or just this fear of like, oh, we can't throw away any ideas. What if they're good?
Exactly. And then the article also talks about PO bottlenecks, which is where the product owner becomes like the only one who can make decisions, and it can really slow things down.
Yeah, it becomes a single point of failure, basically.
Yeah. And then there's velocity addiction, which is where teams get really focused on their velocity, the number of story points they complete per sprint. But that doesn't always actually translate to real value for the customer.
Exactly. It's like you're measuring the wrong thing.
Yeah. And the article makes a really good point. It's like Scrum can work, but it often devolves into this kind of busy work.
Yeah, and it's like you're getting stuff done, but is it the right stuff?
Right. It's like checking things off a list, but is it really moving the needle?
Exactly.
So then that's kind of where Shape Up comes in, right?
Yeah.
It's like, hey, let's try a completely different approach.
Just like a breath of fresh air.
So Basecamp developed Shape Up, and it's got some really interesting differences compared to Scrum. So instead of sprints, they have these 6-week cycles, and then after the 6 weeks, there's a 2-week cool-down period.
Yeah.
Where people can kind of catch their breath.
Exactly.
And the other thing with Shape Up is they have fixed time, but flexible scope. So you have 6 weeks to work on something, but the scope of what you're actually going to deliver can change during that time.
Yeah, it's a much more realistic way to approach product development, I think, because things change, priorities shift.
Right. And the other big thing is there's no traditional backlog. Instead, they have this process called shaping, where they really think through an idea before they even consider building it.
Right. So it's not just like throwing everything into a backlog and hoping you'll get to it someday. It's about like being really intentional about what you're going to work on.
Yeah, exactly. And then those shaped ideas are pitched to the team. And if the team decides to go for it, then they have a lot of autonomy in how they actually build it.
Yeah, the builders are really empowered to make decisions and figure out the best way to solve the problem.
And one thing that's really interesting about Shape Up, too, is that it's designed for smaller, more senior and focused teams. So they assume that people have the experience and the skills to really like self-manage and make good decisions.
Right. You need a team that can handle that level of autonomy and responsibility.
Yeah, exactly. So the articles highlight some pretty big advantages to Shape Up. For one, it seems to really eliminate those fake commitments that can happen in Scrum.
Yeah, you're not pressured to commit to, like, unrealistic sprint goals that you know you're probably not going to hit.
Yeah. It's more about being honest about what you can actually accomplish in that time frame.
Right, and recognizing that things will likely change along the way.
Right, and then the backlog overload.
Yeah.
Shape Up just kind of like sidesteps that whole issue.
Yeah, because you're only focusing on the ideas that have been properly shaped and pitched. So you're not wasting time on stuff that's not really ready to be built.
Yeah, it's like only the best ideas make it through the shaping process, and that really helps keep things focused.
Exactly.
And then, like I mentioned before, that builder autonomy sounds like a huge plus. You know, instead of being micromanaged within a sprint, the team really owns the solution.
Yeah, and that can lead to, like, much more creative and innovative solutions, right? Because the team is really engaged and invested in the problem they're trying to solve.
Exactly. But, you know, as with anything, Shape Up's not perfect.
Of course not. No system is perfect.
So the articles point out some really key assumptions that Shape Up makes. And one of those assumptions is that the upfront shaping process is always going to be accurate.
Right. That's a big assumption, because what happens if you misshape the problem?
Exactly. What if you realize, like halfway through the cycle, that you didn't really understand the problem as well as you thought you did?
Right. Or if new information comes to light and you need to adjust your approach, ShapeUp doesn't really have built-in mechanisms for those kinds of course corrections.
Right. It also assumes that, like, things aren't going to change that much once the cycle starts.
Yeah, but in the real world, things change all the time, right?
Yeah. Customer needs change. Market conditions change.
Exactly.
And ShapeUp doesn't seem to have a great way to deal with those kinds of shifts mid-cycle.
Yeah, it can be a bit rigid in that sense.
And then the other big assumption is that teams are going to be able to accurately estimate how much work they can do in those 6 weeks.
Right. And if you underestimate, you might not deliver what you promised. And if you overestimate, you end up with wasted time and resources.
Exactly. And one thing that the second article really emphasized was the lack of data-driven feedback loops during the build cycle.
Yeah.
So it's like you're going for 6 weeks without really knowing if you're on the right track.
Right. You're not getting that continuous feedback from customers or from your own internal metrics.
Right. And I think that's something that a lot of teams struggle with, right? Like, how do you know if you're actually building the right thing?
Yeah. It's a constant challenge.
So the second article really dives into, like, the nitty-gritty of where ShapeUp can fall short. You know, especially when you're dealing with the complexities of real-world product development. It talks about how a wrong bet on the shaping could mean 6 weeks of wasted effort. And it emphasizes how essential it is to have a way to course correct if that happens.
That you need some way to adapt to those unexpected changes and new information.
Right. And, you know, I think that's where Kanban comes in.
Exactly. The article suggests using Kanban as a real-world fix, because Kanban's all about visualizing workflow and managing work in progress.
Yeah.
And that can really help with the adaptability that a rigid 6-week cycle might lack.
Yeah. And I'm glad the article highlighted that because, you know, when we talk about ShapeUp, it doesn't really address that feedback loop issue, you know, like what if you find out that you're building the wrong thing?
Right. You might not realize it until the end of the 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And then you've wasted all that time.
Yeah. So the article points out how crucial it is to have some way to get feedback along the way and make adjustments as needed. And it suggests incorporating delivery metrics, you know, things like lead time and throughput to give you those signals.
Yeah, that way you can see how quickly you're actually delivering value and identify any potential bottlenecks that are slowing you down.
So it's like instead of just waiting until the end of the 6 weeks to see if you hit the target, you're constantly getting readings to make sure you're on the right track.
Exactly. It's a much more data-driven approach.
And then another really important point that the article brings up is that ShapeUp kind of assumes that what you're building is valuable to the customer.
Right. It's like, we shaped it, so it must be good. But that's not always the case.
Yeah. And that's where Fit-for-Purpose and Jobs to be Done come in, which, you know, it's all about really understanding what the customer is trying to achieve.
Yeah, it's about, like, what job are they hiring your product to do? And are you actually helping them do that job effectively?
Yeah. So the article suggests that you actually need these frameworks, F4P and JTBD, to make sure that you're not just building stuff in a vacuum, but that you're really solving the right problems for the right customers.
Right. And that means segmenting your customers, understanding their specific needs, and then defining clear fitness criteria like, is it fast enough? Is it reliable? Is it affordable?
So it's not just about shipping the feature, but about making sure that feature actually delivers value. And then the article also touches on the fact that, shape-up can be challenging to scale. So if you've got multiple teams working on a larger product, it can be difficult to coordinate everything and make sure everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, because shape-up doesn't really have any built-in mechanisms for managing dependencies or shared infrastructure.
Right. So it's like if you're a small, really focused team, shape-up could be great. But if you're a larger organization, you might run into some issues.
Yeah, you might need some additional tools and processes to help you scale it effectively.
Right. And the article suggests using upstream-downstream Kanban to manage those dependencies and improve visibility across teams.
Yeah, that's a great way to coordinate work and make sure that everyone is working towards the same goals.
Okay, so it seems like shape-up is a really interesting approach. It's got a lot of potential, but on its own, it's not a magic bullet.
It's like a great starting point.
Yeah. But you probably need to combine it with some other things like Kanban and F4P to really make it work in the real world. And that brings us to the third article, which really gets into the idea of integrating shape-up with Kanban and F4P. And it talks about Kanban being this flow management layer that can really help shape-up shine.
Yeah.
So one of the big benefits is that Kanban gives you this real-time visibility into how work is flowing.
Right, so you can see where things are getting stuck.
Yeah.
And identify potential bottlenecks.
And the article talks about WIP limits, which is basically limiting the amount of work that's in progress at any given time.
Right, which helps teams focus and prevents them from getting overwhelmed.
Yeah. It's like you're only allowing a certain number of things to be in flight at once.
Exactly, and that can really improve efficiency.
And then there's the idea of classes of service in Kanban. So if you have like a really urgent task, you can tag it as expedite and it'll like jump to the front of the line.
Yeah, that's a great way to handle those unexpected but critical items without disrupting the entire flow.
Yeah. And then Kanban also has these built-in feedback loops. So you're constantly getting feedback on how things are going and making adjustments as needed.
Right. It's all about continuous improvement.
And the article makes a really interesting point about how F4P can be used to make sure that the work you're doing in ShapeUp is actually delivering customer value.
Right. So instead of just shaping based on your own internal ideas, you're actually going out and talking to customers.
Right. And you're understanding their needs.
Exactly.
And then you're shaping your work based on that feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And the article also talks about validating the outcome of each cycle using those fitness criteria that we were talking about before.
So you're not just measuring whether you shipped the feature, but whether it actually achieved the desired outcome for the customer.
Right. Like, did it make their lives easier? Did it solve their problem?
Exactly. And that's the real measure of success.
And then the article suggests using box scores and AZ matrices to analyze customer feedback and make better decisions for future cycles.
It's all about using data to drive your product development process.
So it seems like this combination of ShapeUp, Kanban, and F4P can create this really powerful system.
Yeah, you've got the structured cycles of ShapeUp, the flow management of Kanban, and the customer focus of F4P. It's a pretty compelling mix.
Yeah, I like the analogy they use in the article. They say that ShapeUp is like the steak, Kanban is the cooking technique, and F4P is the sauce.
I love it.
So it's like each one brings something important to the table, and when you combine them, you get something really delicious.
Absolutely.
But then, the articles also raise this really interesting question. Like, what if we go even further?
Even beyond ShapeUp.
Yeah. What if we move beyond the idea of fixed time boxes altogether? And that's where Kanban as a standalone method comes in.
Right. And I think this is particularly relevant in today's fast-paced, constantly changing world.
Yeah, because those fixed cycles, whether they're Scrum sprints or ShapeUp 6-week cycles, they can sometimes be a bit too rigid.
Yeah, it's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Exactly, because things change so quickly these days.
Right. Customer expectations are constantly evolving. New technologies are emerging. And if you're stuck in a fixed time box, it can be difficult to adapt.
Right. And I think we've all experienced that, where you're in the middle of a sprint or a cycle and suddenly there's this urgent request from a stakeholder.
Oh, yeah. And it's like, well, we can't do that now. We're in the middle of a sprint.
Yeah. Or, you find a critical bug that needs to be fixed immediately.
Right. And then you have to make these tough decisions. Do you blow the time box?
Yeah.
Do you ship lower quality work?
Or do you just completely demoralize the team by making them work crazy hours?
None of those are good options.
Right. And Kanban, with its focus on continuous flow, really offers this more adaptable and responsive way of working. So instead of having these fixed time boxes, work just flows through the system as quickly as possible.
Yeah. And teams pull work in as they have capacity, so you're not constantly overloading people.
Right, and the article emphasizes how important those classes of service are in Kanban. Because you can tag work as standard, fixed date, or expedite. So you can prioritize things appropriately without disrupting the overall flow.
Exactly. And then instead of focusing on velocity, which is really just a measure of how much work you're getting done, you focus on flow metrics.
Like lead time and throughput.
Yeah, which give you a much better understanding of how quickly you're delivering value to customers.
So stakeholders can see exactly what's going on, in real time.
Right. They can see what's in progress, what's blocked, and how quickly things are moving.
Exactly. It's much more transparent.
And predictable.
Yeah. And the article makes a really good point about how people often think that Kanban means there's no structure.
Right. It's like, oh, there are no deadlines, so we can just do whatever we want.
But that's not true at all.
No, Kanban actually has a lot of structure. It's just a different kind of structure.
Yeah. So instead of having these arbitrary time boxes, you have WIP limits, explicit policies, and continuous feedback loops to keep things moving smoothly.
Right. It's a much more dynamic and responsive system.
So the takeaway here is that in today's super fast-paced world, that ability to maintain a continuous flow of value is becoming more and more important.
Definitely. And Kanban's a great way to achieve that.
All right, listener, as we wrap up this deep dive, the key takeaway is that there isn't one right approach to product development. Scrum has its place, Shape Up has its strengths.
Right.
And Kanban offers a different perspective, and F4P adds a layer of customer understanding.
Yeah. It's all about finding the approach that works best for you and your team.
Yeah. And I think the articles did a really good job of highlighting the pros and cons of each approach.
Exactly. It's about making informed decisions.
So, as a final thought, listener, think about your own workflow. Regardless of what specific methodology you're using, what are some things that you could do to maybe shift towards a more flow-based, customer-centric way of working?
Yeah, even small changes can make a big difference.
Exactly. So think about it, experiment, and let us know what you discover.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.